Hi everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday live Q&A. We have Coach Alina with us. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for inviting me, Daniel.
Anytime. How's life?
It was okay. I think now it's a bit busy period for me because I'm having like a full-time job at the same time, so it's like it's been overwhelming
I hear you.
for a while. So, but I hope it will get better soon.
All right, hang in there. Well, I will say I'm extra grateful that you're taking time to answer some questions with us.
No
Knowing
worries. I love it.
that, very nice. Well, actually, something interesting happened today. I uploaded prepared our software StreamYard to go live, and I did it a little earlier. So we actually already have some live questions. So I think I'm going to try to do this in the future too.
Mhm.
But yeah, with that said, let's jump right in. And I want to say thanks Sherry for sharing a question with us, and Filthy Rich is with us today. Hi.
Hi.
um, yeah, so I'll read this. Hi. One of my main thoughts is that I wish I didn't think about sleep all the time. And I often wonder if I'll ever stop thinking about sleeping. It's always on my mind, even though I'm sleeping better. I'm not trying to make the thoughts go away, but just kind of miss how it used to be. All right, Sherry, thanks for sharing this. And Alina, common theme. What do you think when you hear this?
Yeah, I can totally relate to that kind of like worry about like thoughts about sleep never leaving us. And I think it's helpful to understand like where these thoughts come from because once we understand the source of them and once we kind of like address the source, that's when, because like thoughts in themselves are kind of like a byproduct. So it's really kind of like useless to really fight with them because there's something more like an echo of something that has been going on. And usually with sleep thoughts, the way how I see it is that our mind is the problem solving machine, right? So if there is some sort of a problem, that's when it kind of gets a task. Okay, solve it. So it kind of starts sending us like all this either ideas or just thoughts in terms of like, oh, what if you will not sleep tonight, or bring you some like random memory from past, like when you couldn't sleep. So it kind of like starts giving you the signals because it sees that there is some problem that has to be solved. And the moment when that problem is no longer there, either it's kind of like disappears, or if the perception of that situation changes from something as a problem towards something as like something normal, something safe to experience, and so on and so on. So that's when the brain kind of like drops its strategies in order to inform you to problem solve that situation. So I would say that it definitely takes time for the brain to really kind of like stop perceiving sleep as something that has to be saved, something that is a problem. So it might be take a while for the thoughts to really kind of like uh, dissolve on their own. But what we can help in this process is to look into our relationships with the thoughts, because the moment when we begin to kind of question like, oh, why am I still having this, is there a problem, that's when the brain again gets like task, oh, here's a problem, let me solve it again. But when we perceive our thoughts as something like, okay, there is some like residual like echo from hyper-arousal, and it's okay to experience that, that's when eventually the brain kind of like stops sending us those signals. So it does take time. And I would say that after the fear is no longer there, we can still think about like sleep in general terms, just like we did before insomnia. So for example, when we were like thinking like, oh, what's the time I need to go like home, let's say if we were out somewhere, so it's like we also think about like, okay, I need to now get rest, so because tomorrow I have an important day. So these kind of thoughts are completely like normal and like human, like we need to somehow like orientate ourselves like, okay, we need to sleep or whatever. But in after the fear is gone, the reaction to those thoughts will no longer be there. And yeah, so that's how I generally see it. So it's definitely takes time, but also knowing that after like the recovery has happened, it doesn't mean that we will never think about sleep in general, because like I'm talking right now about sleep, which makes me think about sleep, but it is not a problem because these thoughts about sleep are not really personal. They're not triggering in that sense, if that makes any
Makes
sense.
100% sense. You answered this very nicely, and it's, to me it sounds like Sherry actually, you know, already sees the path very clearly, and not fighting the thoughts, and missing how things were before. But as you pointed out, when we no longer think, it's strange that we have this echo. You will find yourself where you were before, and that was a very nice word, by the way, the echo. I often talk about like residual fear, but like an echo, like the thoughts are kind of an echo of something that happened. Also, very nice
Yeah.
description. Let's check in with Tom here. Says, hello coaches, I have this lingering question about daytime fatigue. It seems though as no matter how I slept the night before, I always feel tired and get body chills throughout the day. Could this be small amounts of hyper-arousal throughout the night that keeps me from feeling refreshed the following day? Thanks, and appreciate everything that you guys do. So there's a lingering, okay, this daytime fatigue, no matter. Okay, got it. Yeah, so if I can go first here, and just say that if anything, when it comes to the hyperarousal, it tends to be the opposite. That as the hyperarousal, if anything, can keep us from feeling tired. We don't really feel it because we're kind of on edge. We're alert, right? So when we have very often when somebody starts kind of leaving the struggle and the fear is kind of fading away, that person often finds that they sleep longer and they're also more tired. And both of them are because of the hyperarousal kind of fading away. Now, what TomTom is describing here to me is a little different than that. It's kind of this like, I'm tired no matter how much I sleep, which to me is helpful because when we see that, sleep has little to do with my fatigue, that can be helpful because we're no longer trying to chase sleep so that we don't feel tired, which is helpful. But to me, it's the story of like, okay, so the fatigue, can often become its own source of struggle. Meaning, to me, fatigue is like this thing that can be both a cue and a clue. So sometimes we have run half a marathon and we're tired, and that's just a very simple cue. It's kind of like when we're hungry, we're supposed to eat. When we're tired, that can be a simple cue. You gotta go get some rest, right? Sometimes the fatigue can be more of a clue, sort of like crying. Like we're crying. Why is that happening? Well, the fact that we're crying is a clue that we're having some strong emotion inside us. We're angry, we're frustrated with something like that, right? It's a clue to what's going on inside us. Fatigue can be that way too. It can be more of an emotion, like an emotional fatigue, and then it's kind of a clue. And so I want to say that I don't know why you're tired, you're feeling fatigue, but oftentimes when we approach it as we approach other emotions, it can be really helpful. Being like, instead of like, why am I tired? I have to do something to be less tired. The being tired is wrong. Then it's kind of other emotions. It becomes amplified the more we want to avoid it. But if we go like, I'm tired now, and I don't know maybe exactly why I'm tired, but it's okay to be tired. I don't need to try to push it away and things like that. Treating it like an emotion, welcome it as much as we can. That can really help with emotional fatigue. So those were the thoughts that came to my mind when I heard this. But what do you think, Alina?
I 100% agree with what you said. I just to add more about like, okay, so when we feel fatigue, then it's kind of like it's a present moment, right? This is something that is like, okay, we are fatigued, and this is kind of like the reality for now. Let's say this day I'm feeling like tired. Okay, but that doesn't mean that acceptance means that I have to put up with it. I cannot allow comfort for myself. I cannot provide some sort of like care for myself when I feel fatigued. So I would say like to pair what you said about like accepting it and treating it as something that can happen in lifetime, but also see how can you help yourself during this time, how can you support yourself as this fatigue is going on, so that we don't develop like a negative perception of the fatigue itself. Because once we develop negative perception of something, that's usually kind of like we get into this like vicious cycle. But once we know that, okay, this is happening, I know that that I cannot like force something to go away, but I can take care of myself during this time. And how it looks, how that care look, can be different for each person. Someone might find, joy in let's say lying down for a while, like on a sofa, like watching TV or something, with nap, without nap, doesn't matter, just providing like comfort, as if you, let's say, how would you behave if you didn't have insomnia and you felt tired? What would you do? Would you maybe on some days, I don't know, go exercising? Some days maybe you would go like take it easy on yourself. So also thinking in that kind of cases, like, okay, there is a reality and how you would like to respond to that, because you have freedom there.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right. Let's check in with Peace, who's back with us and says, "Hello, coaches. Hope you're doing great. Thanks so much for the well wishes, and we're doing fine. Last week, I experienced the real letting go of control, and then I slept very well for the whole week. This real letting go was practically when I thought, I have deep blessings in my life. Insomnia is one of the difficulties. I can really enjoy my other blessings, even if my sleep is not very good. I can still enjoy my days, stop chasing, trying to leave insomnia. It will stay in our life, but that's okay. After this week finished, I began to experience the fake letting go because my intent was to maintain the good sleep, not the same as the first week when I really didn't care anymore about insomnia. How can I manage all these experiences?" Wow, very nice and insightful full question. What do you think when you hear this?
Yeah, I actually really like the first part where Peace was sharing us that, how she saw sleep being just one part of, like, of her life, but there are other things in life that, kind of like deserve attention as well, and focusing on those. And for me, to be honest, I also arrived to similar conclusion when I had like I was genuinely tired of solving insomnia. I was like so sick of it, sick of the whole idea that, oh, I get hopeful because I feel like I got it, and then I don't get it, and then I got it again, and so on and so this kind of like up and down process was like really tiring when I realized that, okay, sleep is something that I cannot forcefully solve right now, but there are other things in life that are, maybe even more important, that actually need my attention, and that where I actually can have some control or impact. So I'm going to focus on them, and I just leave that one just, hang around as long as it wants. And interestingly, it also resulted in a similar like experience where I just realized that I'm no longer solving sleep, but yet it somehow just happens, and I'm focusing on other stuff, and sleep is none of the problems I'm going to solve anymore. And this kind of like switch eventually happened naturally, but I think here like Peace kind of like stumbled upon the classic behavior from the mind, which is like expected. It's really nothing went wrong. It's just like really something that seems to be kind of like bringing the result that we wanted, but we don't know how it happened. So it tries to theorize it. It tries to make a concept out of it. So it will start using efforts in the form of thoughts or some sort of mantras, or reminding ourselves of a certain like like a thought. So basically reminding like, yeah, there are other things in life, that blessings that I can focus on. This is not one of those. And the brain can turn it into this mantra that to use it as a way to escape wakefulness. But what is helpful is to become aware the moment when that sleep changes, and not see it as something that is like a regress or stepping, going backwards in process, but more like a very predictable, very expected behavior from the brain that has nothing to do with the actual, our actual ability to sleep or our actual journey. Is just something that the brain does. It tries to make solution out of everything it sees. Everywhere it can kind of get its hands on, it will try to do something. But when we are not aware of that kind of feature of our brain, that's when it holds power over us. But when we fully aware of its kind of like tricks, then that magic that it does stops being like a mystery to us. It stops being even interesting to us because we know how it works. So and that kind of like in I don't know if the right word is indifference, or more like this kind of like peaceful observance of the stuff that our mind is doing, can actually be that kind of like something that can bring our awareness back to the reality, give us clarity again that, okay, sleep needs no saving, no protection. It's going to happen sooner or later, so I'm just gonna focus on the rest of my life.
100% well said. And you brought up something that I just wanted to emphasize, which is that this is really, I think, all but inevitable, because the concept that sleep happens by itself from like nothingness is so unlikely for the brain to fully understand initially, that when magic happens, like for peace, that you experience this kind of honest letting go, and for the brain not to think, aha, I figured it out, let me try this again. For the brain not to think that is highly, highly unlikely. So I just emphasize what you said, Alina, that this is kind of like typical normal cycle, and the awareness will lead you where you want to be. Well said. Let's read this. Check in with Ria here, who says, I've been dealing with insomnia since 3 years. So I think for 3 years, so since 3 years ago, unable to get rid of sleep fear. Hence, I feel trapped under medications for sleep. Kindly help. I want to say, firstly, Ria, that sorry to hear about the struggle, of course, but glad you're here. And, when I to me, Ria's, comment here is a little bit more of like, if you spend a little time with the like our playlists, Ria, like especially the This is Natto playlist, the Success Stories playlist, I think things will be more and more clear. But just to add something right away, I would say that the first thing that comes to my mind is like when we have uncomfortable emotions like fear, anger, things of that nature, none of us can like just have control over that and say like, oh, I'm gonna get rid of it. Or what was the wording here? Like, yeah, get rid of it. Nobody can decide to get rid of it. It's more like when like this is my favorite analogy. Like if you, Ria, think like you have a friend, you have a message for your friend, and the more your friend goes like, oh, I don't want to hear it, the more you want to like, no, I really got to tell you this. It's kind of like the same thing with emotions, that our brain is just trying to communicate with us, and the more we try to get rid of the communication, the more it wants to amplify it, send it over and over again. So it's counterintuitive, but the more we're like receiving the message, okay, with feeling the way we feel, I think things get easier. And anything else, Alina?
No, I actually totally agree with that, with you, and also kind of like my attention went to this, like trying, like unable to get rid of fear, which is usually a form of resistance that kind of unfortunately creates or perpetuates that fear. So
Yeah.
first, like the resistance to to our emotions can be the thing that actually keeps us in the loop. So instead of
100%.
that, like being open to experience emotions and know that they are safe, and of course education around this topic can really help a lot to demystify a lot of things that happen during insomnia.
Well said. Let's see here. We have Klaus has been writing several comments. It's just hard. If you're there with us, Klaus, I would say this, like, if you can write like maybe one question or something easier to answer, that would be helpful, and I'll check in and try to answer that. And in the meantime, let's check in with SGB. Says, feeling anxious about hyperarousal, and as the night approaches, I begin to notice it. How to approach anxiety about hyperarousal, because I know that's the route of insomnia. Okay, very insightful and interesting question. I know exactly where my mind is going right now, but where's your mind going until we hear this?
I think like the last message was kind of like revealed some sort of like possible hidden effort where we feel like now like hyperarousal. Well, okay, so it is true that on one hand, feeling hyperaroused prevents or kind of disturbs sleep. Of course, when we are like anxious, agitated, then of course like sleep becomes in certain sense like elusive. It gets more difficult to fall asleep. But when we begin to kind of like demonize hyperarousal, believing that feeling hyperarousal always means that we are going to have a terrible night, that's when we get into this kind of like a double vicious cycle, where when not only do we struggle to to sleep, but we also struggle to actually alleviate some of the hyperarousal symptoms or manifestations, because we exactly feel like we must get rid of hyperarousal, or we must get rid of anxiety and fear, because if I don't do that, I'm not going to sleep, I'm not going to get rid of insomnia. So now I think to untangle this situation, we cannot continue pushing the narrative that hyperarousal is very bad. It's something like really terrible, and I'm not supposed to feel hyperarousal. Rather, try to see how we can change that perception, and maybe even disconnect the emotions from the actual sleep outcome. Because sometimes it's often happens is that we might be anxious, but then sleep still happens, right? And then on some days we might be completely calm and like have a lot of clarity and peace, but then the sleep does not go as we expect, or maybe like the night is like completely like completely wakeful. And of course it can puzzle, but such experiences can also show us that we don't have to fight with hyperarousal for sleep to happen. It can happen whether there is hyperarousal or not. It might be a bit more challenging for sleep to happen, but it doesn't mean that every time we feel hyperarousal that sleep is not going to happen. So, and this is like the starting point, I believe, that we can start untangling this, so that we feel safe while feeling hyperarousal, because we know that but just by feeling hyperarousal, it doesn't mean that our night is ruined, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes 100% sense. And like I went in sort of a different direction, which is more the point of like hyperarousal is a result of anxiety or other emotions. Like when we're excited, we can be hyperaroused. Happy, we're hyperaroused. Like but my thinking was more like hyperarousal comes from anxiety, and so it's in a way like when we're like I'm anxious about being hyperaroused is sort of like similar to it's sort of like being anxious about being anxious itself. It sort of comes to this territory of like I'm scared of being scared, I'm anxious about being anxious, things like that, which when we see things like that, when we see that, oh, there's really nothing, like there's no real danger or threat here, what I'm trying to avoid and fight with or escape is just my emotions, then I think that can just be clarity. It can be a clarity moment when I see like I'm just scared of being scared. That's all. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah.
Let's see. Klaus said, all good. Thanks for that. And then said, what would you say to someone who is so sleep deprived that it makes putting insomnia past them almost impossible? Like in my case, I truly almost can't speak in sentences and couldn't at all for literally a year. So the question is like, if you're so sleep deprived that you're sort of like barely functioning, then how are you going to, leave insomnia in that scenario? Actually, yeah, to me, it's like a common type of question like this. I have many versions of this question, and I can go first because it's kind of like then I give you some time to think. But what I'm thinking of this is like basically when somebody says, "Yes, Daniel, like I sort of understand that being okay with what's happening would let me it would make things a little easier for me. But the thing is, what I'm going through is a real, like really intense thing." Klaus mentions I almost can't speak, and other things that often come up is like I'm physically, I'm in pain. I have like, my eyes are almost shut. I barely function. I can't concentrate. I'm exhausted. I'm drained. I'm crying. I'm like, so the question becomes like, how can I be okay with what's happening given like how I feel? And when somebody's so sleep deprived that it makes insomnia almost impossible, I would say that I've never come across anything more helpful than what I'm about to say, which can come across as like, okay, that's not very helpful, but I think there's something here. So if we imagine someone who has, something that sounds like completely different. Let's say somebody is a car salesman. This is one of my analogies. They're selling cars. And when it comes to that, if we imagine somebody who's trying to sell us something, we never want to buy from somebody who seems desperate. Like if somebody seems like desperate to sell us something, we feel like, oh, this is probably not a good deal. we don't want to do that. So for a salesperson, it actually helps to be unattached, to be like, if I sell this car or not, doesn't matter. I'm just going to present the car to this customer and let them do what they do. And if this car salesman, for example, has had a streak of like selling cars like right and left, it's probably very easy for them to be unattached because it's okay. Like I sold 10 cars yesterday. I don't need to sell like it's easy. But if this same car salesperson, like if it's like their livelihood, their business, everything hinges upon this next sale. If they don't sell this next car, like, it's going to be catastrophe for them. Well, as hard as it is, the same principle still applies. It's so hard for them not to be attached to this particular sale of this car, but it's still true that if I can be okay with not selling it, even if it's so hard, it is going to be a little easier. So it's sort of the same idea here, that we can acknowledge that everything we're going through truly makes it really, really difficult to be okay with what's happening to us. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the principle is true, that if I can just be a little more okay with what's going on, a little bit less resistant, that is what's going to lead me to where I want to be. So, it may not seem like earth-shattering, this, Klaus, but I hope that makes sense. But yeah, in the meantime, you have some time to think. Alina, what do you think when you hear this?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, and I was also like coming, how to say, like in contact with, or like people were getting in contact with me who were in a very desperate state. They were really almost like panicking, like very scared for their health, and the only thing on their mind would be like, okay, I need to do something. I gotta do something. It cannot be just, I cannot accept this. It's really, so the mind is like screaming at them, like, okay, you are, I don't know, if you don't sleep, you are going, I don't know, whatever, to have some problems with your health and so on and so on. So what I find helpful, and of course, like this is not like a medical advice or anything, but what I find helpful, like when there is like the mind that really wants us to really, how to say, like make sure that we are safe, sometimes it's okay to actually go and see like, okay, like how I would say, if there is like really like sleep deprivation and there is like really difficulty talking and so on and so on, then okay, we can still, like if there's health concerns, we can go to doctors, we can check and like completely or give the mind what it wants in terms of like, okay, I'm looking into this problem, I'm solving it, so that the brain, instead of like being afraid to let go, it actually sees like, okay, things are kind of like being taken care of, and that already can remove some of the pressure that we experience. So as paradoxical as it may sound, sometimes when we, or the mind really like compels us, like, you need to solve this, you have this weird physical sensation and so on, then I see nothing wrong with going to check it, just like at least for the peace of mind. And oftentimes when a person would say like, I think I have like, something wrong with my hormones and I really need to get to the bottom of that. And when you see that the person is not really, how to say, like, the concept of like, letting go of control and things like that don't resonate, the best thing I think for them to do is to actually go with what the mind kind of like wants them to do, in terms of like, okay, if there is like really, the mind thinks like, okay, there's something problem with the hormone, or if I have some problem with speaking or something, then just check it like with your doctor. That's completely fine, it's completely allowed. So the same way how I, in the beginning of like my insomnia, when I did not know what is happening, I was very scared. So the first reasonable thing to do when I felt like I'm in emergency, I went to my doctor. Just and then when my doctor said like, well, there's nothing wrong with you, that already took some peace, or how to say, took some load of my mind. So I felt like more at peace, just knowing that, okay, I did the best I could. So this is something like what I would kind of think of if there is certain like really strong fear towards like whatever, something is wrong with my health and so on, then really just go with the I don't know, common sense or logic. If there is like need to check your health, go for it, because it's really we can of course like discuss like acceptance and so on, but of course like nothing from what we say actually can really replace the the confidence when you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you like you're fine or whatever, like whatever it is. So I don't know what's your thoughts on that, but I
Yeah,
feel
no,
like
I 100% agree with that. And we don't know Klaus, of course. Maybe Klaus has already been to the doctor and found some reassurance that maybe not, but 100%. If anybody's concerned about their health in any way, talk to your doctor 100%. And Dawn said she congratulates on a nice analogy. So glad it made sense, Dawn. And Malina's here with us today. She's in Hawaii. And I really thought about how I never wanted to travel to anxiety, but now I have no fear and sleep well. Look at that. That's the perfect one to end where I enjoy Hawaii, Malina. Alina, thanks so much for being here. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.